Think you know your neighbors? These three stories will prove you wrong. I'm currently in a very troubling situation, and honestly, I have no idea what to do. Let me explain from the beginning. 5 years ago, our next door neighbor, Charles, though most of us call him Charlie, told us his 14-year-old son had gone missing. He filed a police report. It made the news, and for a while, it was all anyone talked about. My wife and I felt terrible. We did whatever we could to support them. As time went on with no updates, we assumed they had finally accepted that the worst had likely happened. We never had the courage to ask if a body had ever been found. Occasionally, Charles and his wife Kathy would invite us over for a barbecue in the summertime, but something had changed in both of them. Kathy became distant and quiet, and Charles always seemed anxious and uneasy, understandably so given their loss. Then last week, Charles approached me while I was taking out the trash and asked to borrow a shovel. I didn't hesitate. I handed him my best one without asking questions. He said he had some work to do in his backyard and promised to return it the next day. He disappeared behind his house, and I thought nothing of it, until I looked out an upstairs window that gave me a full view of his backyard. There he was, digging a deep hole. He looked like he was struggling a bit. He's in his mid-50s now. I thought I'd grab another shovel and offer to help. But when I stepped into his backyard and called out his name, he jumped up, dropped the shovel, and rushed over to stop me. "No, it's okay," he said. "I've got it. Please, just leave." I told him it was no big deal, but his tone turned strange. "I won't let you use that shovel in my yard," he snapped, then pointed toward the gate. I was stunned and walked away without another word. From my upstairs window, I watched him dig for another 30 minutes. Once he finished, he started glancing around nervously, scanning the neighboring houses. Then he looked straight at my window. I froze. He had seen me. I tried to play it cool and walked away. Still, something felt off. Later that night, at about 1:30 a.m., I heard the sound of digging again. It was too dark to see anything clearly from my window, so I quietly stepped outside and peeked over the fence. I saw him still at it, digging under the moonlight. When he finally went inside, I snuck into his backyard and looked down into the hole. There, barely visible, was the corner of a black trash bag sticking out of the dirt. I glanced toward his back door, then back at the hole. I repeated that 3 times, debating whether or not to investigate further. In the end, I ran back to my yard, and it was a good thing I did. Charles came back out moments later, but this time he wasn't digging. He went to the side of his house and didn't return. I quietly returned to bed, trying not to wake my wife. The next morning, I looked out the window again. The hole was completely filled in. His SUV, which was usually in the driveway, was now parked on the street. I don't know what he did that night, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever had been buried in that hole may have been his son. It's all just speculation. I know. Maybe I'm overthinking. I haven't told anyone, not even my wife. But what really frightened me happened just yesterday. I happened to glance across at Charles' house, and I saw him staring at me through one of his windows. When he realized I saw him, he quickly closed his blinds. And this was in broad daylight. I don't know what to do, but honestly, I'm scared. I've lived in 3 different homes during my life. I'm currently living on my own. But my family and I spent the first 15 years of my life in our original house, and then another 7 years in our second before I moved out. This story took place at that first house during the last few months we lived there, back when I was 15. I don't recall my family being particularly friendly with the neighbors. There were two boys living next door with their father, and despite living beside them for years, my brother and I had only exchanged words with them once or twice. Oddly enough, we still knew their names, Eric and Todd. One afternoon, my younger brother, he's 5 years younger, and I were playing basketball in the driveway. That's when Todd, one of the boys next door, came over and started talking to us. I don't remember the exact conversation, but I do remember that the first thing he asked was whether we were really moving. Since I was the older sibling, I did most of the talking. Todd seemed to be around my age, though I never asked. By the end of the conversation, he invited me and my brother to join him and Eric the next day to shoot BB guns by the river in the woods down the road. It was the weekend, and I had no plans, so I agreed. My little brother asked if he could come too, and Todd said yes before walking away. The next day, just before sunset, Todd and Eric rang our doorbell. We rushed to answer it because our parents didn't know we were heading out. We walked with them down the street, both of them dressed in camouflage and carrying a big duffel bag full of BB guns. It all felt way too intense, and my brother and I kept exchanging looks, trying not to laugh. When we reached the woods, hardly a word had been spoken. I started to get the feeling these two were just different. Maybe that's why we had barely interacted with them before. Todd dropped the bag and unzipped it, while Eric broke a branch off a tree and hurled it into the river. That moment wasn't funny anymore. Todd then handed us each a gun, and then casually told us they were real. Eric pulled out one of the weapons and began firing it across the river into the trees. That's when it hit me. He wasn't joking. These were actual firearms. I was filled with a mix of fear and frustration. I grabbed my brother's gun and stuffed both back in the bag. I told them we weren't okay with this and needed to leave. Eric stopped shooting, and the two of them stared at us, their faces half angry. One of them shouted a curse as we walked away. I always sensed something off about them. That moment confirmed it. I warned my brother not to talk to them again while we were still living there. That night at dinner, we told our parents the boys were weird, but didn't mention anything about the guns. That same night, I woke up to cold air hitting my face. My window was wide open. Then I felt something press against the back of my head and heard a voice behind me whisper, "Shh." I didn't scream. I somehow stayed calm. It was Todd. I recognized his voice immediately. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, especially his dad, about the guns or what happened, he'd come back and kill me and my whole family. I nodded and quietly whispered, "Okay." He shoved my head forward with the barrel, then climbed out the window and disappeared. From that night on, for months, I'd see either Eric or Todd staring into our windows from theirs, sometimes into my room, sometimes into my brother's. Their behavior only got creepier as our move-out date approached. About a week before we left, I woke at 1 a.m. to a loud thud. A rock had been thrown at my window. I looked out and saw Todd standing in the yard pointing a pistol at me. Terrified, I dove to the floor. Then I heard laughter. They were laughing at me. I heard one of them call me a fing pie. There were two more creepy incidents that week, and honestly, I couldn't have been happier when we finally moved. To this day, neither of us ever told anyone the full story, or about the threats. I still believe those two were deeply disturbed kids, and leaving that house may have saved our lives. 2 weeks have passed since this happened, and it's still burned into my memory. I've never really liked my neighbors. I'm a recent college graduate living on my own for the first time, but that independence comes with a price. I ended up in a terrible neighborhood, the only place I could afford a home. As you can guess, my neighbors aren't exactly ideal. On one side, there's constant loud music blasting. On the other side, things are much worse. Living next door are two women. One is in her 60s, unfriendly and detached from reality. The other is a bit younger and appears to have severe mental disabilities. I have no clue how they're related. Often, I'd be relaxing on my porch and glance over, only to see the older woman physically restraining the younger one during some sort of meltdown. She would fold her arms, rock violently, and let out loud, incoherent screams. Sometimes she'd even point directly at me while whispering nonsense to the older woman. It was unsettling, so much so that I'd often just go inside to escape it. One night, everything felt routine until the noise next door got out of hand. The younger woman was yelling nonstop, while the older one was shouting frantically. This lasted nearly an hour before I couldn't take it any more. Frustrated, I stormed over and knocked on their door. The older woman answered with a hostile, "What do you want?" I tried to keep calm and politely asked them to lower the noise. She gave me an annoyed, almost mocking look. Suddenly, the younger woman burst into the room, shrieking, "How dare you!" over and over. The older woman struggled to hold her back, then slammed the door in my face. I stood there, confused and rattled, feeling like I'd accomplished nothing. But at least the screaming stopped, and I finally managed to fall asleep. That sleep didn't last. I woke up around 3 a.m., feeling like I'd only just closed my eyes. As I lay there, I thought I heard something downstairs. I cautiously got up and listened. When nothing followed, I returned to bed. But barely 20 minutes later, I was wide awake again, and this time I didn't know why. Then I heard it, a noise. Frantic, I grabbed my phone to use its screen for light. I didn't turn on the flashlight. Something told me not to. I scanned the dark room, heart pounding. Nothing. But then I heard the noise again. Closer this time. Turning slowly, I saw something black, round, and low by the side of my bed. As my phone's light hit it, I froze in horror. It was the face of the disturbed woman from next door, peering at me like some kind of nightmare. She screamed, a wild, inhuman shriek, as if the light itself caused her pain. I screamed too. In a panic, I tried to run, stumbled, and looked back to see her crawling toward me. I managed to slam my bedroom door shut and sprint downstairs, locking the door behind me. I called the police while she pounded on the other side, still screaming in gibberish. When the officers arrived, I told them she lived next door and was mentally unstable. The older woman came over, clearly distressed, and pleaded with the police to let her stay, but they insisted on taking her in for the night. One of the officers asked me if I wanted to press charges. The older woman gave me a stare, cold, venomous, filled with hate. I declined, but the look in her eyes didn't change. They drove the younger woman away, and the older one returned to her house still glaring at me. 5 minutes later, I watched her get in her car and drive off. They still live next to me, and I'm seriously thinking about moving. I don't feel safe. The younger woman isn't just mentally ill, she's terrifying. And the older one, I think she blames me.